Okay, good morning, Year 10. It's now or never. This is one of the longest poems we've got, so we're going to have 2 videos of annotating it. Now, you've done your Monday lesson, which was just to remind you about War Photographer and Remains, which we did last week. And we're going to do regular Seneca quizzes nowadays, especially as I've now worked out how to use it, so that we can just keep going back over. I would suggest that you also read through your notes. When you get given an assignment to write things, because that is another way of revising, by keep going back over. So as we know about Exposure, Exposure is a poem written by a very famous war photographer, honestly, by a very famous war poet, Wilfred Owen. And the only time it's necessary to know about Wilfred Owen is the information I gave you as the original PowerPoint introducing this poem. So I might bring a bit of that information up. If you can hear any side noise, it's the dog, so I apologize. He doesn't want to leave today. Right, so let's talk about the tone. Now, thank you to Jamie Lee for making this suggestion. I've done this on all my poems from now on. I've been using a post-it, and I've been reminding myself every poem when I'm talking about the tone, the structure and form, the soap aims, and I give myself a green highlighter, which is really important because the green highlighter is going to give me the well, it's the kind of thing that this poem has that's particularly special. So some poems might be like we had with Remains or with War Photographer, they'll be different. I always use my super brightest highlighter for tone because that's the part that sticks out. So I always have my orange, and then I always have my pink, then I always have my blue, and for this time my green is being reserved for the metaphors, personification, sorry. I'm going to get this right, which is actually a form of metaphor, so I'm partially right. It's being reserved for the personification, okay? So I just do that, and I put it to the side and remind myself, right, let's move on. While we're talking about tone, first thing we remember is we are doing this by the Foss method. So we have to immediately, when we write about it, start writing about form and structure. And when we start writing about form and structure, which is form for the F for Foss, we start thinking about the opening. And the opening is the title. So I always talk about the title first. So let's see what the title, we've spent ages going over the ideas that the title gave us last time. So the title, are we talking about this idea that the soldiers are being left out in the fields, in the trenches, in the freezing, bitter winter to die? They're not actually fighting, they're just being left behind. So, soldiers not doing their agreed job, no fighting, but left behind or left over. Is it because the government do not know what to do? Should they send everyone over the top? They might die, but then the soldiers will be doing their jobs. Well, that seems to have a large number of casualties and not much of a feedback. So when the soldiers are not doing their job, we could start by saying, exposure may seem to the soldiers, this metaphor of exposure being left behind. Or, remember, we are always being critical because we always want to come up with an alternative viewpoint. Okay? Or, is this poem about a soldier, Wilfred Owen, exposing the government propaganda about the war. Okay? And that's a really good way of starting as well. So you could say this or this. And I'm going to move a little bit more with either, with both, okay? So in the very beginning of the poem, the opening, the title, it causes us to question what is the truth about the war. So it causes us to discard, jingoist propaganda. All right. So we're discarding the jingoist propaganda. We are exposing the lies, all through the use of this title, exposure. We are also exposing who is in control. So this is a power idea, okay? And these could all be important questions that this title brings up. Oops, pardon me, we're getting all sorts of interesting views there. Okay, so let's start. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing. Yeah, it could also be foreshadowing. So if you want to use a beautiful writer's method for a soap aims, you might take it in a literal way. All right, and it's literally foreshadowing the fact that these men are being exposed to the wind, the rain, and the snow. Right. So this, as we know, when we start talking about the beginning, we always say in the opening, blah, 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 which you've just done, and you've talked about the title. And then you would like to talk about the form. So that is my blue. No, it isn't. That's my pink one. So I'll be expecting to see pink. Right, so the form is rhyme, rhythm, etc. Let's look at the rhyme. This rhyme is called para-rhyme. Okay? So I'm doing a lot of note-taking down the side today, and I wanted you to see that. So, there is rhyme, but para-rhyme. Okay? That's a really important technology method word. Try and remember it. Para-rhyme. So, when we look at rhyme, we look for a control. This is not in a controlled format, other than the fact that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and a refrain. So if you're talking about the form, it's not in a sonnet, it's got a refrain, which you could mention, and I would mention that in its own paragraph because the refrain idea is really important. Then you've got the para-rhyme idea. And the para-rhyme is that it's not a complete rhyme, but it is the consonant sounds which are the same, but the vowel sounds are different. So, here are some examples. We have nivus and nervous. So you've got the v and the n and the s, okay? Nivus and nervous. So the vowels in the middle of the I and the change. Nivus, nervous. We've got silent and salient. You can see how that changes. And then we know that at the end, it's entirely non-rhymed and it's forming a refrain of questioning like we did before. So this structure is an A, B, B, A, C structure. And it follows all the way through. So, we know that there's a form with a refrain. We know that there's the para-rhyme. What does this tell us? Using a strong form, a strong rhyme, and a strong rhythm are a sign of control. Okay? The poet is showing where the power is. So using partial rhyme or para rhyme and a refrain, okay, show the poet trying to take control but failing. So already we have ideas about where is the power, who holds this, okay? This is a very important idea about the form and structure that you could use. Additionally, the length of the lines are uncommon. So what we're noticing, there are a lot of uncommon things. He's trying to be in control. There is a rhyme, there is a structure, but then it breaks down when we think about the refrain, and it breaks down when we think about the partial rhyme. And now it is breaking down when it comes to this uncommon line length. We're used to checking line length in terms of syllables. So in these, there are 12 to 13 syllables. Common is 10. Think about iambic pentameter. Okay? Common is 10. The length of the line seems to show that the poet cannot stop. He just hasn't finished when he gets to the end. He just keeps going that little longer. This makes us feel uncomfortable. It's not a comfortable length, okay? And it also makes us think this is going on forever. And that must be how it feels toward these men stuck in the trenches. So we've got the tone from the opening, form, straight in for Foss. Opening and form. Let's check out, when we talk about the opening now, the first stanza. Okay, now, first thing to notice are some of our soap aims here, and your blue pens are going to go crazy on soap aims. We've got all sorts of really nice alliteration, and as we know, alliteration draws our attention, slows us down, further lengthening the lines. Wearied we keep awake. We have iced winds that knife us. Now, those alliterations are not particularly long. Wait till you get toward the next couple of, as you go toward the middle of this poem, the alliteration is amazing. We've also got this amazing start, our brains ache. And I'd like to point out that Wilfred Owen loved a particular poet, and he used to read this poetry all the time, and he loved reading this poetry. So I'm going to give you an intertextual link. Use that as your method. An intertextual link means I'm going to link this poem to another poem and show how they compare. And this can be compared to a poem that Owen loved by Keats, who was an 18th century poet, who was a romantic poet. That doesn't mean he was talking about love. It meant he talked about the power of nature. Okay? And he talked about a quote from his poem, I can't remember what it was called. Oh, Ode to a Nightingale. Ode to a Nightingale. All right? So lovely image of nature, Ode to a Nightingale, all right, by John Keats, and it starts the same way. My heart aches. That's your intertextual link. Right, now when he's talking about this poem, he is talking about how, in Keats' poem, Ode to a Nightingale, he's talking about how he is, that nature is so beautiful, okay, and that nature is the only truth, and that it is beautiful. And Owen is on purpose using this. He's copied the start, our brains ache, from my heart aches. He's done this on purpose to show that actual nature is brutal, and that the true poet has to be truly truthful. Okay, so his truth is that nature is brutal, not beautiful, but brutal, and it compares. When you use the intertextual link, you want to compare. So this is really important. We don't need to know all the details about Keats' life and why he's a romantic poet. We just need to know this one intertextual link to My Heart Aches and Our Brains Ache. All right. And this is blue because it's all about soap aims. That's what an intertextual link is. It's just a method. And we're coming up with this really great idea that by looking at this intertextual link, you're getting the idea straight away. First line, nature is brutal, not beautiful. And that was going to set the tone. Oops, I can spell set. And that is the orange pen. Do you see? The very beginning, the opening, sets the tone. Nature is brutal. I'm going to get this right. Right. Let's look at some personification with my gorgeous green pen. Merciless iced winds that knive us. Right. The wind is kniving us. Now, a normal student will say, oh, and that shows that it's brutal. We've already looked at it being brutal and violent. But I want to focus on this word merciless. All right? The idea of it being merciless is an emotion. Okay? It's an emotional adjective. You could call it sensory, I suppose, but I wouldn't know how to go that far. So it's an emotional adjective, and it shows, it's almost a link to God. Okay? God in nature. So does that mean God is brutal, or does that mean God is letting nature have its way and mimicking the fact that men are brutal and that they're just going to have to live with the consequences of living in the natural world? We don't know. But it is a link to God, and we are saying, is nature working with God? So straight away, it's giving an idea to us in the very first line that the tone is that nature's brutal, and a suggestion that potentially, by using the adjective merciless, that God might be involved with nature being brutal as well. So is God brutal? As we know, Owen trained as a priest, and this is an interesting idea that he might have decided that that's the case. Okay, so other people might consider knife. We're looking at merciless. Then we hit this alliteration. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. It's really focusing our attentions on the fact that there's a we here. We are really talking about the fact that there are a lot of people involved, as well as the poet. So he's one of many. And we're going to use the fact that it is an interesting irony. Okay? An irony that when things are silent, you'd think, oh, that means all is well. But in this case, in war, When it's silent, it means that there's something could be waiting to happen. We cannot afford to lose our attention and fall asleep. So we keep awake. And you notice there's that focus on the W. From the alliteration, focusing on the fact that they are tired, yet they can't sleep, because the irony is that even though it's silent, something may happen. All right? This alliteration really, really, really shows us that the soldiers' lives are very, very difficult because they can't sleep even when they're exhausted. And that's part of the irony, isn't it? Right. Okay. And we can show the fact that they feel, therefore, that they are exposed. That they are being exposed. It mimics. Let's get our arrow going. It mimics, which means is pretending to be. Yes, the exposure. So, are the enemy ready to attack? Really shows whether there is anything with this literal interpretation of the idea of exposure. And we have lots and lots we've got this for the nivus and the nervous. So we have worried by silence, sentries, whisper, curious, nervous. Do you see how the assonance is drawing this out with the commas? So we've got the assonance working together. The commas from the structure slow us down, ready for the refrain. Now I'm putting the tone as the refrain, always. It slows us down, ready for the refrain. And you can say this sibilance, not assonance, this sibilance shows that there is a sinister silence, which we're using our sibilance to describe. Okay, so the sibilance is working together to slow us down. Something bad's going to happen that's sinister, but nothing happens. Okay? I'm going to suggest that this is potentially a political message. Okay? It's against the propaganda and the jingoist wording of everything the government is sticking out. We could also have something else that the exposure is doing. It could be literally foreshadowing the fact that these folks are going to die because there isn't adequate clothing. So we need to add something in here which I've forgotten to do, and I apologize. The inadequate supplies and clothing is emphasized by the fact that nothing is happening. Because if they were active and fighting, they'd be less cold. Okay? So the fact that nothing is happening is a sign that they wish something was happening just so they could warm up, potentially. Sorry, that's the dog. Okay? Is the reader going to be appalled? Appalled meaning, I can't even spell it. Appalled, which means, are they going to be shocked and disgusted by these conditions? Maybe they are. Let's check at some personification at the beginning of the next. Then, so this is all about setting the scene. Setting the scene, nature is brutal, and war should be involving fighting with decent equipment. Right, I'm going to pause. I'm going to do a new video for the next 3 stanzas.